Good evening, everyone. James Hancock here. I'm back to review episode 8 of season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, an episode called If Memory Serves. Sorry for the delay on getting this posted, but any weekend where I have too many things that I want to cover on this channel, that's always a good problem to have. What I really want to be doing is playing Devil May Cry 5, which came out today. But this episode definitely deserved a quick shout out. If you've been following my reviews this season, you know I'm not necessarily the world's most vocal fan of Discovery, but I must admit that If Memory Serves, in my opinion, is the strongest episode of the season. There's still plenty of work to be done in the show, but this episode at least shows that they're trying to recalibrate a little bit from the atrocious episodes that characterized the earlier part of the season. So I do want to give a shout out to writers Dan Dworkin and Jay Beatty, along with director TJ Scott, for a job well done on undoing some of the damage, at least, that has been done to the Star Trek brand this season. So two things really set this episode apart. First and foremost, the episode had an interesting visual style with a completely different approach to lighting, shot composition, and camera movements. People might scoff at the total number of lens flares, but at least the episode was pretty to look at. The second thing was a brief little homage at the opening of the episode to the original unaired pilot for the show featuring Captain Pike, an episode called The Cage. Watching those first few episodes of Star Trek are absolutely fascinating in that you can see the show almost being reinvented stylistically, episode by episode, until they finally settle into a groove that's more familiar to us. Spock was quite different in those early episodes, but in The Cage, the main difference is that there's no William Shatner. Actor Jeffrey Hunter ultimately decided to focus on movies when the decision was made to shoot a new pilot with a greater emphasis on action, but pieces of that original episode were seen later in the season 1 two-parter, The Menagerie. Now, for years, the episode was thought to be lost, apart from a black and white 16mm print that Gene Roddenberry possessed, but eventually the full episode was rediscovered and released on VHS in 1986. If you dig pop culture history, definitely take a look. While they don't specifically give a star date in the episode, the story takes place roughly 13 years before the first official season of Star Trek, allowing it to serve as the backdrop of the latest episode of Discovery. Thankfully, the folks behind Discovery didn't try to rewrite The Cage, but instead just used it to their advantage. That's what makes canon cool and why it should be respected. My favorite moment all episode is when the flashback from The Cage cuts dramatically to a shot of Pike aboard the Discovery. I have to admit that I'm finally becoming a fan of Anson Mount, and I think he's one of the strongest ingredients of the show as it currently stands. But just so I don't get carried away with my enthusiasm, this episode is not a home run. While I loved its use of the Telosians in repairing the damage to Spock's mind, the overuse of Section 31 this season is completely eradicating what made Section 31 cool in the first place on the show Deep Space Nine. Secrecy and mystery were a huge part of Section 31's appeal, but now every single person in the galaxy seems to have a full and complete knowledge of Section 31, who's involved, and how they conduct their affairs. But before I go any further, let me give a brief summary of the plot. Michael Burnham and Spock arrive on Talos 4, the one place Spock knows where his mind can be repaired. They soon encounter Vina, the woman that Pike fell in love with on The Cage. She crash-landed on that planet a long time ago, and her mangled body only remains intact as long as she chooses to remain with the Telosians. The Telosians are few in number due to a nuclear holocaust, but they have incredible power, and they quickly diagnose that Spock is having trouble perceiving time in a linear fashion. They agree to repair the damage on the condition that Michael Burnham share her memories of what drove a wedge between her and Spock many years ago. As it turns out, the Red Angel has appeared to Spock many times throughout his life to offer him premonitions of future danger. As a child, the Red Angel warned Spock that Burnham was about to get eaten by this giant monster, and consequently, her life was saved. As an adult, the Red Angel revealed to Spock a future where all sentient life is destroyed, something the Red Angel is trying to undo using Spock and the Discovery in the past. And he knows that Section 31 desperately wants to rip all this information from his mind, no matter what might happen to him. As we see, Spock killed no one while escaping from that asylum. He only used a few neck pinches, in spite of what Section 31 has said. I'm beginning to suspect that over time, Section 31 evolves into the threat that the Red Angel is trying to oppose. And we finally get to see the big scene that pushed Michael and Spock apart many years ago. While I did enjoy this episode, this big revelation was kind of weak. What we see is this melodramatic confrontation where Michael tries to run away from Vulcan due to the logic extremists who won't tolerate the presence of humans. Baby Spock offers to run away with her, and Michael has to say some really cruel things to make him stay behind. His hurt feelings from this encounter have led to him avoiding getting in touch with his human feelings ever since. But now that that scene is out of the way, hopefully the show will never have to mention it ever again. The rest of the drama of this episode takes place aboard Discovery. We see Hugh Culber struggling with who he has become. He ends up throwing down with Ash Tyler, something Saru allows to happen, although Pike tells him after the fact that brawls will not be tolerated moving forward. Culber decides that he no longer feels quite like the same man he was prior to his death, and as a result, his personal relationship with Stamets needs to end. Pike soon learns that they have a traitor aboard, and in the short term, he suspects that Ash Tyler is sending messages to Section 31. Nobody's noticed Commander Ariam's funky red eyes yet, but the Discovery is pursued by Section 31 in a race to Talos 4, in spite of the fact that Ash Tyler is confined to his room, meaning that Ash Tyler is actually innocent. But when the two ships arrive on the planet, they have this giant tug of war trying to beam Spock and Burnham aboard their respective ships. Pike decides to let them go in order to save their lives, but as it turns out, they're illusions projected by the Telosians. The real Burnham and Spock sneak back aboard the Discovery via shuttle, and there was a nice little moment that gave me a brief chill when Spock smiles and raises his eyebrow during his reunion with Pike. I hate to admit that the show made me feel something, but I did get little goosebumps. But with Section 31 still on their tail, Discovery has to go rogue in order to continue on the Red Angel's mission, and the whole crew rallies behind this decision by Pike. In the teaser for the next episode, we see Section 31's headquarters, as well as Commander Ariam going completely berserk, so I guess her secret is finally revealed. As I mentioned earlier, I suspect that the current iteration of Section 31 will have something to do with the threat in the future, and the crew of the Discovery will need to at least partially dismantle the organization to prevent that future from happening, but that is pure conjecture on my part. I'm just relieved that I finally got to see an episode of Star Trek that didn't make me want to have a temper tantrum, and hopefully the show will sustain this momentum going into the next episode. So I think that's all I got for now, but I should give you a heads up that starting on Sunday, I'm going to be covering the show American Gods. Season 2 premieres Sunday night, and I'm very excited for it. I recently read the book, so I'm totally fired up and ready to go. And if you haven't seen Season 1 of American Gods, definitely give it a look. But I hope you enjoyed this little reaction and review. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you want to talk more about Star Trek or American Gods or whatever, look me up on Twitter, @Colbrex. There's a link in the description below. But I hope everyone has an amazing weekend. If you're a gamer, let me know what you think of Devil May Cry 5. But thanks again for watching my video, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.